There's a story about two young fish swimming along who meet an older fish swimming the other way. The older fish nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The two young fish swim on for a bit, and eventually one of them looks over at the other and asks, "What on earth is water?" As we gather this Christmas to celebrate Jesus as the light of the world, we're a bit like those young fish. We live in a world that speaks of human rights, equality, compassion for the weak, and social justice. And we treat those ideas as if they're as natural as the air we breathe or the water we swim in. We assume that, of course, every person has value, and of course, we should care for the sick. But history tells a different story, that these ideas are not natural. They didn't appear out of thin air. They're in fact the direct result of a light that entered a very dark world 2,000 years ago. And historian Tom Holland, not a traditional churchgoer, spent years studying the ancient world of Rome and Greece, and he came to the startling realization that we're not secular or neutral today. Instead, we are, as he puts it, saturated by Christian assumptions. And he writes this: "We swim in Christian waters. Even those who imagine they have emancipated themselves from Christian belief are shot through with Christian assumptions about almost everything." In the ancient world, your value was tied to your status. If you were a slave or a foreigner, you were essentially invisible. But the teaching that every human being is made in the image of God acted like a moral earthquake, and it gave birth to the idea of universal human rights. Again, Holland notes that every human life is of equal value, is a very distinctive, very culturally specific belief, and it is one that derives almost entirely from the Christian Revolution. That light also reached into the darkest corners of human history, that of the battlefield. Before this light arrived, war was simply another shadow of might makes right. But the teachings of Jesus introduced a radical idea that even your enemy is a neighbour. And this birthed what we call just war theory. And it's the reason we believe today that there are such things as war crimes, the idea that even in the middle of a conflict, you cannot do just whatever you want, that there's a moral law that stands above the general and the king. As Holland points out, the idea that a soldier should have a conscience, or that there is a law of nations that protects the innocent during war, is a legacy of the Christian conviction that every person belongs to God, not simply to the state. Before that light shined, there was no such thing as public hospitals. In those days, Roman hospitals were only for soldiers to get them back to the front lines. And it was the early Christians that stayed behind in plague-stricken cities to nurse the dying, even their enemies. They believed that because God became a man and suffered, God is found in the suffering. So every time we see a Red Cross, a local hospital, a food bank, a homeless person house, we see this lingering glow of that light. This light of Christ levelled the playing field. In a world of rigid castes, the Apostle Paul grew new communities of the faithful, we call them churches, and he wrote that there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. And this belief fueled the abolition of slavery today, universal suffrage and civil rights movements across the world. It taught us that the beggar has the same moral standing as the emperor, and that life matters, however small. But let's ask a counterfactual question. What if this light hadn't shined? To understand how bright this light is, we have to imagine this counterfactual, the world as it might have been if the darkness had prevailed. So let's imagine a world where the Roman law of the jungle had never been interrupted by the gospel. In that world, mercy would be considered a psychological weakness. If you saw someone struggling, you wouldn't feel a nudge to help. You would simply see them as unfit for survival. The worldviews of Nietzsche and Hitler would prevail and would be our normal. In that world, education would be a guarded secret for the elite. The idea that every child, regardless of their background, deserves to read and learn would be considered a waste of resources. In that world, the concept of human rights would be a joke. There would be no moral language to argue against a tyrant, because justice would be simply whatever the person with the biggest army said it was. As Holland reminds us, the symbol of the cross itself shows this change. To a Roman, the cross was a sign of ultimate darkness, a way of saying, this is what happens to the weak. But Christ took that darkness and filled it with light. Again, Holland writes, the cross of Christ was the source of a revolution that has transformed the world. It was the pivot on which the history of the West turned. But there is a shadow side when that light is co-opted. We must also be honest about this, that throughout history and even in our own headlines today, there is a recurring tragedy. People taking the name of light to justify their darkness, their fears. We see it when faith is twisted into a tool for racial or ethnic pride, or when Christian identity is used as a shield for hostility towards the stranger and the refugee. We've seen this in national movements, where the cross is used not as a symbol of sacrifice, but as a boundary marker of red crosses painted on roundabouts, not lifted in churches. So when we see the refugee or the foreigner not as a neighbour to be loved, but as an enemy to be feared, we've stepped out of the water of the gospel and back into the dry desert of the ancient world. So what if we did allow the light to be put under the bowl of nationalism or fear? The result is a return to the darkness of tribe against tribe, nation against nation, where the weak become cattle to be herded, not neighbours to be valued. But this Christmas, the motif of John 1, chapter 5, verse 5, remains our anchor. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness of human pride, the darkness of fear and hatred for outsiders, and the darkness of our own fear for national identity cannot extinguish the light of Christ, because that light doesn't belong to us, it belongs to him. Our task is not to own the light to our own ends, but to live in it, to join with it. So let us remember that the water we swim in, the values of mercy, justice, and the dignity of every human being requires a source. Let us keep our eyes on that source. May we be a people who do not use the light to build walls, but to light the path home for everyone who is lost in the dark. Thank you, and Happy New Year.